The papers were signed at 2:47 in the afternoon on a Thursday in late October, and by the time I walked out of the lawyer's office on Bay Street, the maple trees lining the sidewalk had turned the color of embers. 41 years. That's how long I'd built Mercer Cold Chain Logistics, starting with 2 refrigerated trucks out of Barrie, Ontario, ending with a fleet of 300 and a distribution network stretching from Halifax to Vancouver. And now it belonged to someone else for $47 million, wired clean into my account before the ink dried. I stood on that sidewalk for a long moment, hands in my coat pockets, just breathing. The wind off the lake had that particular bite to it, the kind that reminds you winter in Ontario is not a negotiation. I thought I'd feel lighter. I thought 41 years of weight would just lift off my shoulders the moment it was done. Instead, I felt something I couldn't quite name, not empty, not sad, just still, like the moment after a very long storm when you step outside and you're not sure yet if it's really over. I called my son-in-law first. His idea that he'd suggested the week before that we celebrate together as a family, just the 3 of us, him, my daughter, and me, at a nice restaurant downtown. Somewhere befitting the occasion, he said. I remember he used that word, befitting. I thought it was an odd word for him to use. He'd never been a fancy word kind of man. It's done, I told him. Dad, he said the word warmly, the way he always did, stretching it out just slightly. That's incredible. We're so proud of you. You deserve this more than anyone. My daughter's voice came on in the background, bright and clear. Tonight then? Patrice is already looking up restaurants. Patrice. That's my son-in-law. He'd been with my daughter for 11 years, married for 7. I liked him when they first met. He was steady, grounded, practical. He'd worked in financial planning for a decade, knew how money moved, knew how to talk about it in ways that made a man feel secure. When my daughter brought him home to our place in Innisfil that first Christmas, I remember thinking she'd done well. He shook my hand firmly, helped clear the table without being asked, and didn't check his phone once during dinner. People change. Or maybe they don't change at all. Maybe you just stop noticing who they always were. We agreed on a restaurant in Yorkville. Not the most expensive place in the city, but close enough. The kind of place that doesn't put prices on the menu until you ask. Dark wood paneling, white tablecloths, wine list the size of a small novel. My daughter had made a reservation for 7 o'clock, and when I arrived they were already seated. 2 glasses of sparkling water on the table, menus open. She stood when she saw me. We hugged. She smelled like the perfume I'd given her for her birthday 3 years ago, the one her mother used to wear. I noticed that, the way you notice a small knife. Her mother, my wife Janet, had passed 8 years before, pancreatic cancer, 5 weeks from diagnosis to the end. We'd had 31 years together, and then we didn't. You don't stop loving a person just because they're gone. You just learn to carry it differently. Patrice stood as well and shook my hand. Big, warm handshake. His eyes were very bright. Well, he said, grinning, the man of the hour. We sat. We ordered. I got the lamb. It was always the lamb at a place like this. My daughter ordered the halibut. Patrice said he wasn't very hungry and got just a starter, a small plate of charcuterie. I remember thinking that was unusual. He always ate well. The man had the appetite of someone 20 years younger. The conversation was easy at first, the way conversations are when everyone is performing ease. My daughter asked about the closing process, about what the lawyers had said, about whether the new owners had any plans to rebrand the company. I told her probably yes, eventually, but that the staff contracts were protected for 2 years minimum, which mattered to me more than the name on the trucks. I'd looked after those people. I wasn't going to leave them exposed. Patrice listened more than he spoke. He swirled his wine, nodded at the right moments, laughed when laughter was called for. But there was something underneath it, and something I registered without consciously registering, the way you sometimes sense a shift in the weather before you can name it. He asked about my plans, retirement plans, investment plans. Where did I see myself living long-term? Was I thinking of staying in the Innisfil house, or perhaps downsizing into the city? Had I spoken to a financial advisor yet about structuring the proceeds? I said I was in no rush. I was 67 years old and in good health, and I had more money than I'd ever need, and I intended to spend the first little while simply not thinking about any of it. He smiled. Of course, he said. You've earned that. My daughter excused herself to go to the restroom. I watched her go and then turned to look at the room. The other diners, the low lighting, the sommelier moving quiet as smoke between the tables. The kind of room where you feel, briefly, that the world is well-ordered and calm. I got up to take a call. A former business partner of mine from Edmonton had been trying to reach me all day with congratulations, and I didn't want to take the call at the table. I stepped out toward the small corridor near the coat check, pressed my back against the wall, and talked for maybe 8-10 minutes. The usual things. Congratulations. How does it feel? What comes next? What comes next? I didn't know yet. When I came back through the dining room, I was still a few tables away when I noticed a young man, one of the waitstaff, maybe mid-20s, dark jacket, standing very close to our table. Too close. Not serving, not clearing. Just standing there, and then stepping back and turning towards the service corridor with a particular speed that people use when they don't want to be seen having been somewhere. I stopped. In 20 years of running a logistics company, you learn to read small things. The way a driver holds his clipboard when the delivery numbers are wrong. The way a dispatcher answers the phone when there's been an incident they haven't told you about yet. You learn that the body always speaks before the mouth does. I kept walking toward the table. My daughter was back in her seat. Patrice was cutting into his charcuterie, casual as a Sunday morning. 2 wine glasses on the table, mine and his, both poured while I'd been away. I sat down. I reached for my glass, and then something, I don't know how to explain it, except to say it was some old muscle, some instinct that had kept me solvent through 4 recessions, made me stop. I set the glass back down without drinking. My daughter said something about dessert. Did I want to look at the dessert menu? They had a maple creme brulee that she'd had before, and it was exceptional. I said maybe. I excused myself again. Bathroom this time, and on my way I walked past the service corridor. The young waiter was standing just inside it, and when he saw me, something moved across his face. Not guilt exactly, more like relief, the way a person looks when a decision is being made for them. I paused. You were at our table, I said quietly. Just now. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked past me, out at the dining room, and then back. Sir, he said very low, I don't want any trouble. I have a family. I need this job. I'm not going to cause you any trouble, I said. Tell me what you saw. He was quiet for 3 seconds. I counted them. The gentleman at your table, he said. While you were away. I was refilling the water and I saw him. He had something small, like a little vial. He put it into one of the wine glasses, the one on your side of the table. I stood very still. Are you certain? I asked. Yes, sir. I've been standing here trying to decide whether to say something or just pretend I didn't see it. He exhaled. I can't pretend I didn't see it. I thanked him. I asked his name. He told me it was Finn. I told him Finn had done the right thing and I would make sure of it. I went back to the table. I sat down. I reached for my wine glass, picked it up, leaned slightly to my left as I looked toward the window, and in that movement I set my glass down at Patrice's place and picked up his, natural as breathing. He was looking at his phone. He'd taken it out while I was gone, and he didn't notice. My daughter was talking about her and Patrice's plans to visit Costa Rica in the new year. Son, she said, was exactly what they both needed. She looked healthy and bright, and I thought about how much she looked like her mother sometimes. Same mouth, same way of tucking her hair behind her left ear when she was nervous. And she was tucking it now, though she was smiling. I drank from Patrice's glass. It tasted like wine. Nothing else. 20 minutes later, my daughter went very quiet. It started with her setting down her fork. Then she pressed her fingers to her temple. Then she said, in a strange voice, that she wasn't feeling well. Dizzy, she said. Nauseous. The room was spinning. Patrice looked at her sharply. His eyes cut to the glasses on the table. He looked at my glass. His glass, now. And then he looked at me, and in that moment I saw it. Clean and clear as anything I've ever seen in my life. He knew. He understood exactly what had happened, and the expression on his face was not concern for his wife. It was calculation, fast and cold, moving through his features like something trying to find a way out. She needs a doctor, I said calmly. I turned and raised my hand, and a waiter came immediately. Call 911, I said. My daughter is ill. Patrice stood up. Let's not overreact, he said. She probably just needs some air. Let me take her outside. Sit down, I said. I said it quietly. I said it the way I used to talk to contractors who just told me they'd shorted a delivery by 10,000 units. Not loud, not angry, just final. He sat. The next minutes moved in a way that time sometimes moves. both very fast and very sharp, like every detail cut from glass. A manager appeared. 2 waitstaff cleared the area. My daughter was lowered to a position where she could breathe. She was conscious but confused, her hands shaking, her lips pale. The paramedics arrived in under 7 minutes. I was watching the clock. They came through the restaurant fast and professional, crouching beside her, asking her questions she was struggling to answer. When they moved her onto the gurney, Patrice moved toward her, and one of the paramedics put out a hand, not blocking him, but pausing him. And in that pause I said, to no one in particular, clearly and loud enough for the restaurant manager and both paramedics to hear, I believe there is something in my daughter's wine glass. I'd like it tested. The glass was sealed in a bag by the time the police arrived 14 minutes later. 2 officers, then 2 more. I sat at the table and I answered every question they asked me in the order they asked them. I told them what the waiter, Finn, had seen. I told them about the switch. I told them about Patrice's expression when he understood what had happened. Patrice said very little. He'd gone very still, the way people go still when they understand that speaking will only make things worse. He asked, once, if he could call his lawyer. They told him he could do that from the station. I rode in the ambulance with my daughter. She was already more alert by then, whatever had been in that glass working faster than whatever the paramedics were doing to counter it. Though they had an IV in her arm and were monitoring her closely, she looked at me from the gurney with eyes that were still cloudy, confused, frightened. Dad, she said, what happened? I held her hand. You're going to be all right, I said. That's what matters right now. And I meant it even then, even knowing what I knew. The hospital was Mount Sinai. We were there for 6 hours. My daughter's blood work came back within 2 hours, and the attending physician, a composed woman named Dr. Halabi, who clearly had seen things far stranger than this, confirmed the presence of a sedative compound in her system. High dose. Not life-threatening as it turned out, but it would have incapacitated her completely within another 20 minutes. She would have been unconscious by the time they'd gotten her home, or wherever they'd planned to take her. The detective who came to speak with me was named Sergeant Whitmore. He was about 45, unhurried, with the kind of face that has heard most things and remains unimpressed by new ones. He sat in a chair beside the window of my daughter's room while she slept and asked me to walk him through the evening from the beginning. I did. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, clicking his pen once, twice. You said your son-in-law works in financial planning, he said. He did, I said, up until about 3 years ago. He left his firm. He said he was starting his own practice. Did he? He told me he had clients. He showed me a website once. I paused. I never looked into it closely. I trusted him. Sergeant Whitmore made a note. We'll look into it. They looked into it. What they found, and what came out over the following weeks and then at trial, piece by piece the way these things always come apart, was this. Patrice had not had a working financial practice for 2.5 years. He had 3 clients, all of whom had withdrawn. He had debts I hadn't known about, a failed real estate investment in Mississauga, a private loan from a man who was not the kind of man you want to borrow money from. He had been living, quietly and carefully, on my daughter's salary as a hospital administrator, and on the occasional check she'd received from me over the years when I thought she needed support. He had known about the sale of the company for 4 months. My daughter had told him. Of course she had. He was her husband. He had spent those 4 months planning. The plan, as best as the investigators reconstructed it, was straightforward. Sedate my daughter at dinner so she would be incapacitated and unreliable as a witness. Present me with paperwork, which they found later on his laptop, nearly complete, assigning power of attorney to him for what he would claim was a medical emergency involving my daughter. Use that power of attorney to access my accounts in the immediate chaos following the emergency. $47 million sitting in a newly liquid account, a man in apparent crisis over his daughter's sudden illness, a window of maybe 48 hours before anyone would look too closely. It was well thought out. He was not a stupid man. He was just a man who had forgotten that I'd spent 4 decades watching people try to shortchange me. The charges against him were serious. Administration of a noxious substance, fraud, conspiracy. His lawyer was competent, but the evidence was not kind to him. Finn's testimony, clear, steady, delivered without drama, was the cornerstone. The forensics on the wine glass confirmed the rest. The documents on his laptop confirmed the rest of that. He pled guilty on 2 of the 3 counts 8 months later. He received 4 years and was ordered to undergo a financial restitution assessment, which, given that he had almost nothing, was largely symbolic. His lawyer tried to argue stress, financial desperation, a momentary lapse in judgment that had become a terrible plan. The judge listened politely and sentenced him. My daughter was a different matter entirely. She hadn't known. I want to be clear about that, because it matters, and because I know how these stories can be told in ways that leave things ambiguous for the sake of drama. She had not known. The compound in her system was real. The doctors were clear about what it would have done to her. She had been as much a victim as I was. Perhaps more, because I had an instinct and a waiter named Finn, and she had had nothing except a husband she thought she knew. When she was well enough to understand what had happened, she sat in my kitchen in Innisfil with a mug of tea she didn't drink and stared at the table for a very long time. I knew things were hard, she said finally. With the money, with his work, I knew it wasn't going well. But I thought, she stopped. I thought he was just embarrassed. I thought he'd figure it out. I know, I said. I didn't know he would. She stopped again, swallowed. Dad, I'm so sorry. You don't owe me an apology, I said. You owe yourself a very long conversation eventually when you're ready. But not to me, she cried. I let her. I made more tea. Outside the window, the ice on the lake had just started to break up. It was March by then, the dirty snow end of an Ontario winter, the kind of March that still can't make up its mind. A crow was sitting on the fence post by the shed and seemed to be judging both of us. We sat there for a long time, my daughter and I, saying nothing, which is sometimes exactly what's needed. She filed for divorce 6 weeks later. The house they'd been renting in Etobicoke went back to the landlord. She moved into a small place in Barrie, closer to me, which I was glad about, though I tried not to show it too much, because she was 34, and didn't need her father treating her like she was fragile. She wasn't fragile, she was angry, and she was grieving, and she was starting over. And those are different things. I spoke to her every other day, sometimes every day. We'd gone through a period in her late 20s, after her mother died, when we'd been somewhat distant, both of us too caught up in our own versions of grief to reach each other properly. This was different. This was the two of us finding out, late, that we were better at being family than we'd thought. There is something that happens when a crisis is survived. Not healed, not forgotten, just survived. Something shifts. You stop performing fine and start actually being fine, slowly, in increments, with setbacks. The lawyer calls and you feel sick, and then you feel better. You drive past a restaurant and remember, and then you order whatever you want and you eat it, and the memory stays, but it loosens its grip, just slightly. I'd made a decision in the hospital, the night of, while my daughter slept and the monitors beeped their quiet reassurances. I made 2 decisions, actually. The first was that I was going to tell Finn's manager what had happened and why, not just as a thank you, but formally, in writing, to the restaurant owner. I wrote a letter 2 days later, explaining exactly what Finn had done and what it had meant. The restaurant owner called me personally, and we spoke for 40 minutes. I found out that Finn had been with the restaurant for 3 years, had been working nights to support his mother and younger sister after his father had a stroke the previous spring. He was 26 years old, and he had stood in a service corridor and decided that what he'd seen mattered more than staying out of it. The owner said he intended to promote Finn to head waiter and give him a raise. I said that was a good start, and then I told him I'd like to add something to that, if he'd allow me. He said he'd allow me. I established a small scholarship fund through the community college in Barrie, where I'd grown up, for students in trades and technical programs. Not a large amount in the scheme of things, $50,000 seeded to start. I named it for Janet, my wife. She would have liked that. She always believed the skilled trades were where real dignity lived. The people who showed up and did the actual work that kept the world running. A refrigerated truck, she used to say, doesn't drive itself. Finn was the first person I told about the scholarship. I took him to lunch, a different restaurant, quieter, in Rosedale, and I told him what he'd done and what it had changed, and what I wanted to do to mark it. He sat across from me and for a moment said nothing. He was a quiet young man, careful with words in the way that people are when words have cost them something before. You didn't have to do any of that, he said. I know, I said. That's generally when you should. He smiled at that. It was a good smile. I'm 68 now. I live in the same house in Innisfil I've lived in for 22 years. The lake view is the same. The dock needs work. It needed work last year, and I didn't get to it, and now it definitely needs work. But I'll get to it this summer. I have the time. My daughter visits most Sundays. She brought someone with her 3 weeks ago, the first time since everything, a quiet man named, well, it doesn't matter what his name is yet. She was nervous when she introduced him, which she tried to hide and mostly didn't, which I found both hilarious and deeply human. I shook his hand and made coffee, and we talked about hockey for 45 minutes, which is the Canadian version of a job interview, and he passed. Patrice is in a correctional facility in Eastern Ontario. I don't think about him often. When I do, I feel less than I would have expected to. Not forgiveness exactly. Not yet, maybe not ever. But not the hot thing either. Something colder and more permanent. Indifference, maybe. The knowledge that he made choices, and the choices made him, and none of it has anything to do with me anymore. I think about Janet. I think about the 41 years of trucks and cold chain, and early mornings in a yard in Barrie when I was 26 years old, and nobody would have given me $1. I think about my daughter sitting across my kitchen table with her tea gone cold, and how she looked up at me at one point and said, "I think I'm going to be okay." Not like a question, like something she was testing out to see if it was true. I think it is. The crow is back on the fence post this morning. Same one or a different one. Impossible to say. The ice is going off the lake in pieces, slow and certain. Spring in Ontario is not beautiful the way people in warmer places imagine it. It's muddy and gray and reluctant, and then suddenly, one morning, the light changes and it's just light again. $47 million doesn't change who you are. It just makes what you are more visible. I think I can live with what's visible.